Britain is now participating in the US-Israel war on Iran.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases. We have taken the decision to accept this request.
Shortly after his announcement, a British base in Cyprus was hit as the US-Israel war on Iran spreads from the Middle East to Europe.
This is an unmanned drone strike, specifically on the airport runway.
Joining me to discuss the most recent outbreak of violence in the Middle East is former UK ambassador to Iran, Richard Dalton. Richard, let's start with the drone strike in Akrotiri in Cyprus. Why did that happen, and how significant is this?
Well, we don't know who sent that drone. It could be Hezbollah. It wasn't significant in terms of material damage, but it was a warning that other acts of retaliation are possible if Iran and its supporters deems that the UK is now a participant in the aggression against them. Of course, the terms of Britain's involvement are strictly drawn as carrying out their duties as allies and partners of certain countries in the Middle East who have a right of self-defense against the attacks coming in from Iran. And let us hope that the British government is resolute about not being drawn in any further.
Keir Starmer has now said that the US can use UK bases to strike Iran. Does that make us a legitimate target?
Yes, it does, because the Iranians will not distinguish between attacks on its missiles and other wider attacks on its political, military, and economic institutions and leaders. They will say that this is attacks facilitated by Britain on Iran as part of the United States campaign to destroy the Islamic Republic.
And do you think, does Iran have a right to self-defense in that case? Does it have a right to retaliate against US military bases in the Gulf and now British bases, given our involvement?
It does have that right, yes. It would be unwise to retaliate against British bases, and I very much hope they won't.
Back in June, you told us that preemptive strikes like the ones Israel and the US have just made over the weekend are not legal under international law. And neither the British Prime Minister nor the Defense Secretary has come out and condemned those attacks. The US and Israel would say they were justified in doing this to stop Iran's nuclear program. What do you say to that?
International law is quite clear that you do have the right to preemptive attack, but it is confined to cases where there is an imminent threat. Now, both the United States and Israel have tried to propagandize their own peoples, as well as the international community, saying that Israel's missile program and its half or three-quarters destroyed nuclear programs constitute an imminent threat. But everybody can see through that as a bunch of lies. First of all, the missile capabilities that go beyond the Middle East are under development, but they have been many years away from being actualized now for a long time, and Israeli and US intelligence assessments bear witness to that. Moreover, not only was the highly enriched uranium put beyond use by the attacks in June last year, but the Iranians were willing to negotiate a long-term arrangement that went further than the 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, to ensure that the international community can be confident that Iran would never develop a nuclear weapon. So what we saw when Israel and the United States put in place their long-planned attack on Iran was a geopolitical objective going back many years in both countries, but kept under control hitherto by fear of the consequences, to obliterate the Islamic Republic and to put an end to what they see as the long-term threat from Iran once and for all.
I wonder what you think Iran might look like after this and what the off-ramps are for the US and Israel and the UK, given what you said about the diplomatic channel being cut off. Where does this go?
Well, I'm glad that the British government constantly emphasizes the need to go back to negotiations, but they omit, unfortunately, to call for a ceasefire, and they are not working with other middle-ranking powers to bring that about. And of course, the Iranians would be likely to interpret that as tacit acceptance of the objective of a long-term conflict by Israel and the United States designed to destroy them. The talk by the United States that the Iranians are willing to engage in negotiations once more has been denied by very high authorities in Tehran. And it looks as though both sides are now settling down to slug it out and see whose supply of missiles lasts longest and who emerges best off at the end of it. Now, it's clear that the balance of force is overwhelmingly with the United States and Israel. So it's quite possible that after weeks, we will find that Iran is unable to continue its defensive actions. At present, I think their policy is to involve others in order to bring about pressure on the United States and Israel to call a halt in recognition of the fact that the decapitation of the regime hasn't worked and that nobody is able to forecast with any certainty that continued bombardment will give rise to a revolution, a counter-revolution in Iran, and that the counter-revolution will lead to a more stable situation or better government that the Iranian people deserve.
Keir Starmer has said that the UK was not involved in the attack on Iran, but US warplanes have been transiting through RAF bases since January to join Trump's so-called armada. Does that make the UK complicit?
Yes, it does. But until recently, we weren't a combatant. We are now a combatant to defend allies, Gulf states, that is, who have been unreasonably dragged into this conflict, which is not a conflict they should have been involved with, as a result of the ripple of unintended consequences from launching a war of choice through an illegal aggression. Let's hope it ends soon.
Just a couple more questions. Um, our colleague here at Declassified, John McAvoy, revealed in 2024 that Britain had a secret military pact with Israel called Hez UK, which is aimed at countering Iran and Hezbollah. And clearly, this program started some years after you were in Tehran. But were you aware of similar programs or policies when you were ambassador?
Well, I was certainly aware of close collaboration with the Israeli military, and although I have no knowledge or understanding of current collaboration, the reports that I've seen of Hez UK have the ring of truth. The language used in the leaked documents suggests to me that they are genuine. I mean, my position on military alliances is that our publics have a right to know, because they do have consequences, as we're seeing with Britain's decision about the Gulf states. Israel is a source of advanced technology. Wouldn't be at all surprising if the military in Britain wanted to get onto this bandwagon as well. After all, nothing advances technology like war, and the Israelis do more war than anybody else, and are in the position, therefore, not only to have extremely advanced technology companies, but to have refined their operations. It's disgraceful, of course, what Israel defined those technologies for, the total control and surveillance of an entire population in the interests of denying it the right to resist intolerable conditions and the right to self-determination.
Speaking of that source, I mean, we're seeing this conflict already spread within the region, but Gaza, the war in Gaza has continued. It hasn't stopped yet. Do you have any concerns that this current war, this new war, will distract from Gaza and pull our attention away?
Undoubtedly, and it's also inflicting even more suffering on the people of Gaza through the closure of all the borders. At the very least, the Israelis want to prevent any security distractions to their armed forces from that quarter. I can see that. But yet again, it's innocent women and children and families who are bearing the brunt of the shortage of supplies and inability to get the medical treatment that they deserve. Worse, in some ways, is that we are all being distracted from the kind of resolute opposition we should mount in terms of sanctions and not just words against the recent measures of Israel to advance the annexation of the West Bank.
And just finally, I know, you were in Iran for a while, quite a while, and you obviously will have friends, that you've made there that you may be in touch with now. What is Iran going to look like after this conflict, and what are you hearing?
Well, before the conflict, I heard the dilemma of longing to see the back of their government because they've suffered under it for a very long time. At the same time, dread of the consequences of a war against Iran and dread of the consequences of the collapse of the regime if that should be brought about in accordance with US and Israeli war aims. I think that the scenario of a benign revolution with an orderly transfer to democracy is the one that's looking least likely at the moment. I think the scenario of a takeover of military law, martial law, to preserve orderly government with the rump of the Islamic Republic, I think that's a very real scenario. But the situation could deteriorate in the way I have described, and one's sympathy goes out to the 85 million Iranians who did not deserve that, if that comes to pass, and who've been under oppressive government for too long and do not deserve the fate of the Syrians, the Afghans, and the Libyans.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for making time to speak with us. I mean, very grave forecast there. But we're happy to talk to you today and hope we'll be able to talk to you again as this conflict continues to unfold.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for having me.